My husband, who has autism, flipped out over a tiny bit of tomato on his garlic bread and accused me of being ableist for getting angry. Danny, my husband, has autism. It's not super obvious, but it's there. It's not like he's super different or anything, but he's definitely on the spectrum. I've learned to deal with it, though, because my older brother has autism too. I guess you could say I'm used to it. One thing about Danny is that he's super picky about food. If even a little bit of cheese falls on another part of his food, he won't eat it. Like, he'll seriously lose his mind. He can get super mad and start throwing stuff. I'm talking about throwing a fit and tossing anything he can get his hands on. But then, after he calms down, he'll cry and apologize. Last night, it was crazy. I was making my best spaghetti bolognese, the one with the homemade sauce, the fresh basil, and the perfect amount of garlic. I'm telling you, it's seriously good. Danny has these special plates, you know, the kind with dividers like for toddlers. He eats small portions, so he needs 2 plates to have enough food. I put down his spaghetti, garlic bread, and bolognese. You know, that fresh garlic bread with the melted butter on top and those perfect little golden crusts. He loves that stuff. I thought I had everything set up perfect for him. I turned to dish my own food up when I heard him say, "Thanks, babe, wait. I can't eat this. You know I can't." Why? I was so confused. What was he talking about? I thought everything was okay. Then I saw a little bit of tomato had fallen from one plate onto the garlic bread. And that's when I realized what was going on. Danny's picky food thing, you know, the one where he flips out and starts throwing things. He'd seen that tiny bit of tomato, and now, he was not going to eat. I knew I needed to fix this situation quickly before he got worked up. "Oh, sorry, why don't you eat the second plate, and I'll split mine with you," I said. I tried to calm him down. I was hoping I could get him to eat at least something. But Danny, well, he's a bit unpredictable. He got up, and he didn't even say a word. He just slammed the plate on the floor. I heard this loud splat and a squishing noise. When I turned around, both plates were on the floor. The sauce was splattered everywhere, and Danny had a huge grin on his face. "Make it again," he said. He just looked at me, smiling like he was enjoying the whole situation. You know it makes me mad. Do I need to remind you that I'm autistic? My blood was boiling. He was being so difficult. It was as if he wanted to make me angry. I looked at him and said, "Why are you smiling? Your autism is more like a jerkism. I'm not your maid. Can you at least help?" It wasn't the most appropriate thing to say, especially not from me. I work with kids, and I've never even thought about swearing. But that moment, it was as if I just exploded. It was as if a volcano had erupted inside me, and all I could think about was that disgusting mess on the floor. It was my sauce, and now, thanks to him, it was all over the kitchen. Danny seemed shocked by my words. He flipped me off and yelled, "Ableist little BTCH." Then he stormed off to our room and locked the door. I was so angry, but then I started feeling guilty. My emotions were a whirlwind. I was upset because Danny had acted so rudely. He had made a mess, he had hurt my feelings, and it seemed like he was intentionally trying to push my buttons. But on the other hand, I knew he had autism, and he probably couldn't help it. He couldn't control those intense feelings he sometimes has, even if they weren't always rational. I didn't bother cleaning up the mess right then. I was just too upset. I got my own plate, reheated some leftover spaghetti, and ate it on the couch. And I fell asleep on the couch, still thinking about what had happened. The next day, when I woke up, Danny was gone. There was a text on my phone. "You need to be more open to my disability. The world doesn't revolve around you. I hope we can fix this when I'm home later." He was gone. I read that text, and it was like the world had come crashing down. My heart was heavy with sadness. I thought about what he had said. I didn't know what to say, or what to do. I was completely lost. I called in sick to work. I didn't feel like seeing anyone or doing anything but being by myself. I spent the day cleaning the house and reading books. Then, I finally took a shower. That's when I started to really think things through. Danny's autism, his meltdowns, it was hard. It had been difficult from the very beginning. But I tried to be understanding. I tried to help him, to learn more about autism, and to be patient. But what had happened last night felt different. It felt like something had changed, and I couldn't ignore it. I was starting to see things differently now. I had been thinking a lot about the comments people had been making about Danny's behavior. Were they right? Was Danny truly abusive? Was I living in some sort of delusion? Had I been trying so hard to ignore things that I wasn't really seeing the truth? That day, I made some big decisions. It was a turning point in my life. I decided I needed to put my feelings aside and make the most important choice: my well-being, my happiness. It was about time. I wasn't being selfish, I was being brave. It was time to take control of my own life. I called my brother, Eli. He's the oldest of us, and I've always felt closer to him. I explained what had happened, and how I felt. I was so lost. I needed to talk to someone I trusted. Eli always knows how to make me feel better. I needed help. I needed space. I needed to get away from Danny. Eli let me stay at his house, so I packed my things and moved in with him. My brother had been through so much himself. He had always been there for me. I could always count on him. And while I was at Eli's, I started making some big decisions about my future. I decided to get a divorce. It was a tough decision, and it was something I'd been putting off for far too long. I'd always thought, maybe it would work out, maybe things would change. Maybe we could somehow make this work. But after that night, after that text, I knew it was over. I couldn't stay in that relationship anymore. Eli helped me pack up Danny's things while I filed the divorce papers. I felt such a wave of relief. I knew it was the right thing to do, but it was still hard. Danny, he couldn't understand why I was doing this. He didn't see things the same way. The whole thing, it was just too much. I had tried to make it work. I had tried to be supportive, to understand his struggles with autism, to be the person he needed me to be. But I wasn't enough. I wasn't the person he needed. And I was realizing, maybe I wasn't even the person he wanted to be with. One afternoon, Danny called me. He was screaming on the phone, saying that I was abusing him, that what I was doing was disgusting. It was like he was blaming me for everything. He wouldn't stop. He said horrible things. He threatened to ruin my life. I had my phone on speaker, and Eli's wife, Linda, she jumped in and gave him a piece of her mind. Linda, she's like my sister. She always has my back. I'm so lucky she's part of our family. We have spent so many years supporting each other, and her love and loyalty are so important to me. Eli's twin girls, they are amazing. They bring so much joy to my life. Being with Eli, with his family, it helps me remember that life is good. It reminds me that there's still beauty in the world, and there are good people out there who truly care about you. The next few days, I stayed with Eli, surrounded by love and support. I knew I couldn't stay there forever, so I went back to my house. It felt different now. I no longer had to worry about Danny's moods or try to please him. I felt a sense of calm and freedom I hadn't felt in years. I contacted a locksmith and changed the locks on my house. I was so glad to be safe. I could finally breathe again. It felt good to be back in my own space, knowing I was truly in control. I called my siblings and asked them to be my emergency contacts, and they were so supportive. I knew I could count on them, and that gave me peace of mind. My brother told me he had been talking to Danny's cousin, who's been keeping me updated on his situation. I felt bad for Danny, honestly, but I knew I couldn't help him anymore. He was going to have to figure it out on his own. I just had to protect myself and move on. I was so glad that everything was finally over. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. It had been a rough few months, but I was finally free. I was ready to start my life over again, on my own terms, with my family, my friends, and the people who really cared. And I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready to face it. I knew that I could handle it. I had so much to look forward to. Next story. My husband went bananas when we found out we were having a girl. I'm 13 weeks pregnant, and last week we got the results of our baby's genetic testing. It said everything was normal, and we're having a girl. I was so excited. I didn't really care if it was a boy or a girl, but it was nice to know for sure. It felt like a big question mark was answered, especially with everything else being so uncertain. When I told my husband, he was happy at first. But then he said he was a little disappointed because he wanted a boy. As the day went on, he kept saying how much he really wanted a boy. He even joked about hoping for a boy during the whole pregnancy. He started reading online articles about gender disappointment and how it's normal to feel that way, but his disappointment was getting out of hand. He started worrying about things like our daughter getting bad healthcare because we live in the South. It's true that girls sometimes face more challenges in life, but he was getting carried away with his worries. He said he was afraid she would be picked on because she's part black and part white. He also said he was scared someone would hurt her because she's a girl. I told him that these things can happen to boys too. Then he started saying that he didn't feel as close to our daughter because of how he sees girls. He said, what if she likes shopping for clothes? I hate clothes shopping. He even said, you have to teach a girl to be modest. And, get this, I don't know how to teach her to pee. I told him kids are different. Some girls like trucks and some boys like to paint their nails. It doesn't matter. You can guide them, but they'll do their own thing. He also said girls are harder to raise. Right at that moment, we got a call from the principal saying that our 12-year-old niece, who we take care of, was in trouble. I said, it's not that girls are hard to raise, it's that our niece is hard to raise. He just sighed. Finally, he said he wanted a boy so he could be a better dad to him than his own dad was. He said he felt insecure about being a man and wanted a son to prove that he could raise a good man. I told him that he should talk to his therapist about all of this, because he goes to one every Thursday. I looked online to see if other moms were dealing with this. Most of the stories I found were about women having gender disappointment themselves or their friends and family having it, but not their husbands. A lot of people said he'll feel differently once he holds our daughter. That's great, but that's 6 months away, and I gotta live with him until then. I was trying to stay excited about our little girl, but it was hard to deal with all this. My husband has never been the type to let his emotions get the best of him, but this gender disappointment really threw him for a loop. It felt like it had come out of nowhere, especially since he'd seemed so excited when we first found out we were having a baby. Maybe he'd secretly wanted a son all along, but never said anything. Whatever it was, his disappointment made me feel anxious and confused. I didn't want to fight with him or upset him further, but I didn't know what else to do. He started getting more intense about it, bringing up every little detail about the potential downsides of having a girl. I tried to reason with him, explaining that boys can face challenges too. And even though our niece was giving us a hard time at the moment, it didn't mean all girls were difficult. I even told him he should try talking to his therapist about all of this. I started feeling a sense of dread creeping in. I was supposed to be happy and excited about this new chapter of my life, but instead I was worried about how my husband was going to handle it. What if this continued? What if he never really got over it? It was terrifying to imagine having to raise a child with someone who wasn't genuinely happy for their daughter. The next few weeks were difficult. I tried my best to be patient and supportive, but I was starting to feel overwhelmed by all of this. It was hard to share my excitement and hopes for the future with him because he was still focused on his disappointment. He told me, "You just don't understand how hard it is to raise a girl." But I knew exactly how hard it was. My mom and sisters had both raised me and my other sister, and they had plenty of stories to share. I felt like he was simply projecting his own fears onto our future daughter. As the weeks passed, I kept trying to talk to my husband, hoping he'd eventually calm down. I tried to reassure him that it would be okay, that there was still a lot to be excited about. But it felt like he was in his own little world, completely absorbed by his own anxieties and disappointment. It started to feel like a chasm was forming between us, an invisible wall that I couldn't break through. I just hoped this would pass and that his disappointment wouldn't define his relationship with our daughter. My pregnancy continued, and my emotions ranged from excitement to frustration and fear. It was a roller coaster of emotions that I was trying to navigate as best as I could. The due date was approaching, and my fear intensified. What if this was just a glimpse of what was to come? What if our whole lives were going to be shaped by this gender disappointment? I tried to talk to my husband about all of these fears. He looked at me and said, "Look, I get it. I'm probably overreacting, but it's a lot to process, you know?" He did admit that it was all overwhelming, but he was trying to cope the best he could. It was just hard to see it through my eyes. I wished he'd see it from my point of view, but he still seemed to have tunnel vision about his disappointment. I decided to lean on my family and friends for support during this time. They all told me that my husband would eventually come around and that this phase would pass. I desperately hoped they were right. Then one evening, a few weeks before my due date, something unexpected happened. My husband took me out to dinner and told me, "You know, I've been thinking a lot about things. You've been amazing throughout this whole pregnancy, and I owe you a big apology." "It wasn't your fault," I told him. "I was so excited and wanted to share it with you, but I knew it wouldn't be easy for you. It took a lot of time, but I'm glad you're seeing it differently." I could tell he was genuinely remorseful. He then reached for my hand, looked at me with an intensity I hadn't seen in months, and said, "I can't believe how much I'm going to love our daughter. She's going to be my whole world." I could tell he was sincere, and a feeling of hope started to wash over me. Just as I was beginning to believe his words, I started feeling some serious pain. It was time. My husband was ecstatic and drove me to the hospital. The hours that followed felt like a blur of anticipation and joy. My husband was a rock by my side, taking care of me as I went through the entire process of giving birth to our daughter. I was nervous about what our new arrival would be like, but I was also excited. It didn't matter if our daughter had her dad's blue eyes or my mom's laugh. All that mattered was that she was healthy, and that my husband had finally accepted our daughter's gender. That night, when our little girl was born, I looked at my husband's face, filled with awe and love. And I saw a new kind of emotion. It was pure, unadulterated joy. As I held my little girl, my husband took my hand and looked into my eyes. "I can't believe it," he said. "She's perfect. I love her more than words can say." It was a perfect moment. He seemed to have fully accepted her gender. It wasn't as if all his anxiety had evaporated, but he seemed genuinely happy, and so was I. My hope was rekindled. It had taken some time, but my husband's heart was finally open. The days that followed were filled with the typical newborn chaos: endless feedings, sleepless nights, and diaper changes. But through all of it, there was a sense of harmony, a sense that we were finally a family, and that this baby girl, my little girl, was the most important thing in our lives. I was a new mother, and I was so in love with my little girl. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes I had to remind my husband that she was her own person, and he had to realize that all daughters and sons were different. But he had learned to see his fears differently. Our journey had been challenging, but now it seemed so worth it. He looked at his daughter with a kind of love I'd never seen before. And I realized that this new experience had helped him grow, even if it had been rough at times. I knew there would be more bumps along the way, but I was hopeful. We would face them together as a family.